Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Carla Durand, and on behalf of the Collegeville Institute for Ecumenical and Cultural Research, I have the privilege of welcoming each of you here to this afternoon's luncheon and presentation titled From Colonization to Occupation, Israel and the Palestinians. And I'd like to offer a special welcome to Arland Jacobson's wife. Arland is our presenter for today, and Arland's wife, Willie, is joined us today, and his daughter, Karen. And we would also like to welcome all of his guests who have joined us from off campus. So we welcome you to St. John's, and we're happy to have you with us today. Just a couple words about how this afternoon will flow. We will enjoy our lunch. We're going to invite Arland up to the podium in just a few minutes, so you can continue to eat while we talk. And at the end of Arland's presentation, we'll turn it over for a few minutes of conversation and discussion and questions as time allows. And we do plan to end promptly at 1 o'clock. So we'll just know that we've got that much time to work with. As I mentioned, it is my privilege to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Arland Jacobson, and a few words about Arland. Arland is currently a resident scholar at the Collegeville Institute. This is his second residency with the Institute, his first being during the spring semester of 1990. He received his BA in Philosophy and Religion from Augustana College in South Dakota, his BD from Luther Seminary in St. Paul, and his PhD in New Testament and Early Christian Literature from Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California. He is former executive director of the Charis Ecumenical Center and Fargo-Moorhead Communiversity, located on the campus of Concordia College in Moorhead. Prior to his ecumenical work, he was assistant professor of religious studies at Concordia College. These next few pieces of information that I'm going to share with you will tell you a little bit more about who Arland is. And it will tell you that this work he does is not only professional in nature, but it is also deeply personal. Arland is the primary U.S. contact for the Olive Wood Project. This project is an effort to sell olive wood carvings from Bethlehem and churches around our country to help provide income to carver families in Bethlehem. He has been doing this for the past 20 years. Arland has traveled to Israel and Palestine in 1995, 1997, 1999, 2004, 2006, 2008, 2010 to 11, and 2013. He has also made several trips to Jordan, Egypt, and Turkey. And Arland and his family have maintained a close relationship to the Zubai family in Bethlehem since 1997, again, 20 years. The Zuby family has hosted him and his family for extended periods, and he and Willie have hosted them here in Minnesota. So please join me in welcoming Arland Jacobson.
Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon. Oh, it's still not. I'm pleased to be with you today and to say thank you to Carla for helping to organize this. And Viv, I think, was here before. Maybe she's still here. There she is. For helping to make these arrangements. And thank you for coming to this public lecture. My project at the Collegeville Institute is on the history of Palestinian Christianity, 2,000 years of Palestinian Christianity in a country that has been under occupation for 2,000 years or more by a succession of different regimes and they find themselves under occupation still, at least the Palestinians. There'll be three parts to this presentation. Part one will be to establish or think about what it means to be basically in a cage, which to me is a metaphor to describe life as a Palestinian. This happens to be people who are lined up on their way to through the checkpoint going into Jerusalem from Bethlehem. They're not, I'm standing at this end, close to the entry into the checkpoint. The checkpoint actually is a huge building. And so people are simply waiting to get to that building, and for some it'll be could be difficult. For others, like myself, hold up an American passport to go right through. Second part is focused more on a family that I've known, as Carla said, for 20 years, and have had extensive relationships with that family. And it's not just that family, and not just a nuclear family, it's an extended family. And then I threw in some pictures of other members, other Palestinians, because I wanted you to get a sense, if you have not had a chance to experience what Palestinians are like, just some things about Palestinians, allow you to meet some. These are not extraordinary people. They're ordinary Palestinian people. But in some ways, they're also remarkable. The third part will deal with international law and the question about whether international law applies to Israel. Before I do that, I want to make a few comments about the words that are used: occupation and colonialism. Occupation basically means control. And that means control of your movement. For at least I'm talking now about the Israeli occupation of the occupied territories, the West Bank and Gaza. It means control of your movement, control of resources, control of trade and economy. Israel controls the population registry, so every Palestinian has to be registered in the Israeli Palestinian, their Israeli population register. They also control or have to approve educational curricula. All of their lives are really under the control of Palestinians. And Palestinians feel that they do not have a chance really to plan ahead, because you never know what's going to happen the next day. And it's not just because of the violence. It's just because checkpoints, there are so-called flying checkpoints that just suddenly appear. You just never know what's going to happen. You can't plan ahead. So that's kind of what occupation means. Colonialism. The Zionist project started out in the last part of the 19th century as a mostly agricultural settlement project designed to develop a distinctly different culture than had been emerging in Europe, where many of the Jews, especially in Eastern Europe, were sort of bookish and were regarded by the early Zionists as kind of unfit to defend themselves or to be strong. And so part of the idea was to not only to develop the country or parts of the country, but also to develop a culture of strength and so forth. I'll say more about that later. Most kinds of colonialism involve the exploitation of resources and human resources. The British colonialism, French colonialism, German, Spanish, all of them were intended to exploit the resources that were in those countries. There's a different kind of colonialism that has emerged in the last, since 1967. It's called settler colonialism. And it's a kind of colonialism in which Israelis are trying to, little by little, establish themselves in the West Bank in a way that becomes problematic for Palestinians, to put it lightly. So, I think we'll just start with you get the metaphor here of, I wonder if we could dim the lights a little bit. Would that work? Is that better? You can still see each other and you can still see your food. Okay, this is another image of pretty much the same thing. Not everyone is familiar with the territory, so we have to talk about Gaza down here, just a small strip with about almost 2 million people. Very crowded, probably the most densely populated place on earth, or certainly one of them. The West Bank here is called the West Bank because it's on the west side of the Jordan River. And Bethlehem is right here, right below Jerusalem. They're about 5 miles apart. The Golan Heights were also taken in 1967 by Israel. So Israel, in the so-called Six-Day War, took over or captured the Golan Heights from Syria. They captured Gaza from the Egyptians. The Egyptians, it wasn't part of Egypt, it was just Egypt that was administering the territory. And in the case of the West Bank, it was Jordan that was administering that country. It was not part of Jordan. And you can see that, I'll talk about this more later, but part of the Dead Sea is also supposed to be part of the West Bank. Now, over here, you can see some population numbers. The total of Israeli Jews, both settlers and the population of Israel, something over, getting close to 7 million people. Palestinians are divided up into these different territories, including the non-Jewish Israelis. This would be Palestinians, but there are some others as well. But primarily, it would be Palestinians who live within Israel. They are citizens of Israel. And when you add all those together, you see that you come up with a number. These are from the CIA World Factbook. You know, I have as a CIA agent, I have special access to this. Actually, it's online. Anybody can get it. And I use it just because supposedly it's neutral, and it's something that anyone can get access to, so you can check these numbers out. And what you can see here is that the population numbers, the totals are quite similar. And that's something that is very deeply worrying to Israelis. The so-called demographic balance. They are worried that if they were to become a one state, they would be soon overwhelmed by Palestinians who tend to have a higher birth rate, even though Orthodox Jews, especially ultra-Orthodox Jews, have a very high birth rate as well. But anyway, you can see some of the issues there. The Israeli colonies, now this is just to make it a more dramatic visualization, to get a sense of how many there are, because the blue spots are not meant to represent the size of the settlements. It's just to give you an idea of how many there are. Oops, keep pushing the wrong one. So this is the West Bank. There's the green line, it's called, because when this was drawn, they used a green pencil. And so these are the colonies or settlements as of May 2015. The settlers themselves are regarded as Israeli citizens, but they live next door to Palestinians who are not citizens. This, I think, is probably the most interesting map and helps you as much to understand what's going on over there. The Oslo interim agreements in 1992 and 1995 divided up the West Bank into three areas. Area one, fully Palestinian control, meaning both civilian control and military or police control. 18% belongs to them, and 22% belongs to Area B. Now, this, push the right button, this area here, the light-colored areas, those are areas A and B together. So you see areas where there's some control on the part of the Palestinians. However, even in Area A, Israeli army is constantly going in almost on a daily basis. So it's not like they really have control over their lives. One of the goals of Israel's settlement policy has been to preclude the possibility of a Palestinian state. Or, as Moshe Dayan said many years ago, it is to dismember Palestinian territorial continuity. And you can see that they have succeeded in doing that. I have no idea how Arafat and all his people could agree to this kind of thing, but they did. But it was supposed to be, as it says here, an interim agreement for 5 years, at which point Israel was to depart. So Israel should have left in either 97 or 2000, depending on which interim agreement you're talking about. My understanding of how this was built or developed, and I want to investigate this more, but I'm not quite sure. But my understanding is that they took Palestinian villages, drew a line around them, and that would be Palestinian territory. And then everything else around it was Israeli. So you can see that what you have basically here are islands. And in order to get from here to here, or between any of those islands, you have to go through Israeli territory. They can control the movement between all of those lighter colored spots. So what you have is basically 165 islands, including the island of Gaza. It's not an island, of course, but in the sense that it's isolated. And that's what we now call Palestine. And it's very difficult to see how you could have a state scattered around like that. Moreover, Israel has extended its territory so far here that they have cut off the north part of the West Bank from the south part. So I think that this picture, I think, particularly gives you a sense of the predicament that Palestinians face. Now, I should have pointed out there's this laser button is so close to the other buttons. Here's a little kind of pink space in here, a different color. That represents East Jerusalem. This was Palestinian territory that was simply annexed by Israel. So now we can move on. And here you can see it. These are some of the settlements, not all of them. And what Israel, or what Jerusalem used to be in antiquity, or in, let's say in the Middle Ages, was this little area here. It's about 1 mile square. Not 1 mile on each side, 1 mile square. It's a very small place, and it's been divided up, especially by the Turks, into different quarters: Jewish quarter, Muslim quarter, Christian quarter, Armenian quarter. Those are the main ones. And Israel claims that all of this, sorry about that, that all of this represents the eternal, undivided Jerusalem. Well, and they do not want Palestinians to have their capital in Jerusalem, which is the center for Palestinian life, and has been for a long time. So here is a picture of the wall in Bethlehem. My daughter, who's here, sorry about that. My daughter is here. She's also, I won't point a laser, but it gives you some idea of the size of this wall. I mean, it's a very formidable thing with a lot of, people are constantly painting on the Palestinian side of this wall, including this one: to exist is to resist. This one, some of you may know the artist Banksy, who is all around the world, going around. It's a very political kind of graffiti artist. Here, inverting the world, having a small girl check an Israeli soldier. Banksy recently just opened a hotel just inside Bethlehem. It's called the Waldorf Hotel. And it's meant to be actually a real hotel. People are going to be staying there. He claims to have the worst view in the world. It's wall all the way around.
Is this painted on the wall or is it a real building?
I'm not sure. This is just very recent, so
Okay, yeah,
it almost looks like it could be
a building, yeah.
right next to a wall there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure it's not on the wall
Okay.
because the Israelis would not allow that. Now the wall, I'll say a little bit more about the wall, but here you can see how the wall, there's the green line. This is Israel side, and this is the West Bank side. But you see the wall has been used to incorporate a lot of the West Bank into Israel. Israel has control of these areas. This little town here actually is not so small. I think it's about 10,000. It's a Palestinian agricultural village. They do not have access, as you can see, anymore because of the wall to trade, nor do they have access to some of the fields that they had around there. So this illustrates, I think, one of the other problems. We won't spend a lot of time on that. Most of the wall, most of what Israel calls it the separation barrier. And most of the separation barrier is not wall. It is a complex, virtually impenetrable three-fence system. And in the background, you can see a settlement called Har Homa. When I was there in 1997, that hill was forested. It was all covered with forest. Some of you, Jean, did you see it at that time?
No, I just went recently, but I know what you're talking about, how it was forest and then all of a sudden you have these houses.
Yeah, they just started when I was there in 97. So you can see 3 levels of fence, 3 here, and I don't know if you can see the third one over there facing the settlement. And then there is sand here to detect tracks from people. And then there's between here there's a road, a patrol road, so Israeli jeeps or whatever they use are driving through in between those fences. And one of them is the next one here, the next fence is also electrified. It's not going to electrocute you. It's meant to be a detection. Here's the family, or at least a large part of it, including yours truly and my wife and my daughter. But I'd like to have you meet them. This is Jamil. Jamil is going to be, probably by next January, he will become a Melkite Catholic priest. He's on his way right now, going through a series of, through the diaconate. The Melkite Catholic Church is a Eastern Rite, sometimes called. So it is in communion with Rome, but they have a certain amount of independence on their own. And the Arab, we're standing in front of the Melkite Church in Bethlehem. And his wife, Claudine, is here. This is Jad Ivan, who is in this country. I helped bring him over a little over 5 years ago. And he is now working as a counselor for Arabic-speaking immigrants in the Seattle area. He has his green card, but he was warned just this past week, this week, that he may lose his job because of the President Trump's restrictions on travel for Muslims. So he's hoping that he will be able to survive. I think he's in a fairly good position because there aren't that many Arabic-speaking people who are capable of working with immigrants. And this is the mother, Carmen. This is the father, Michael. This is the oldest son, Jihad, his wife, Suha. This is their oldest child, little Carmen, and then little Michael, and then Talene Marie. It's a girl. It may not look like it, actually. Jawad and Ranza, his wife, and then I forgot the youngest son, Jamal, and then Madonna, the only daughter of that family. They were born, they were married in 1983. Michael was born in Bethlehem. Carmen was born in Jerusalem. Carmen is not anymore allowed to live in Bethlehem. When they first got married, it was possible to do that. But increasingly over the years, and especially since 2000, when the wall began, she's not allowed to live in Bethlehem, and I'll say more about that later. Michael is not allowed to live in Jerusalem, so it's kind of a complicated thing. They have to have two homes, but it's not just for, the children are also living with the parents. They applied for family unification in 1983 when they got married. It was granted finally 13 years later, and then canceled a few years after that, and it's never been renewed. So they do not have family unification. Michael currently has a 1-year permit to be with his family in Jerusalem, and that has been, this has been renewed once, so this is the second, this year now is the second time. Permits, there are 101 different permits in Israel covering travel, covering occupation, jobs, covering agriculture, covering everything you could think of. And in order to get them, you need a clean record. So the result is that permits, whether they're intended or not, function to suppress resistance, because if you are interested in maintaining a permit, and you have to keep renewing these permits, and they're temporary. If you want to have the permit, you have to have a clean record. So this family is not politically active. They're not doing anything to get their names in the paper or in the police blotter. A bit more. IDs must be with the person at all times. That means at night as well. Michael has a Palestinian ID. He is not allowed to into Israel or to Jerusalem without permission. That's not peculiar to Michael. That's all Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. They are not allowed into Israel. He can never drive there. He must walk through the checkpoint. Carmen has a Jerusalem ID, and you'll see that in just a little bit. In 2003, all the children's IDs were canceled, some were restored. Some still more since 2000. The stories have been stories, and I talk to them frequently on my phone. And here are the stories about IDs granted, IDs canceled, hiring lawyers to get more IDs, going back going to the Interior Department in Israel, in Jerusalem, in order to try to get it back, making appeal, writing papers, paying money. These permits are all cost money. One son, namely Jad Ivan, the guy who's in Seattle now, lived for 6 years without any ID at all and had to either to stay home or to sneak in, because if you're caught without an ID, it's a criminal offense. It's not a misdemeanor. It's a criminal offense. And you can be put to jail. You can be given a huge fine. It's very dangerous to live without an ID. Most Palestinians in Bethlehem have given up going the 5 miles into Jerusalem to pray or visit their family or to shop. Palestinians are not allowed to fly out of Tel Aviv. They have to go to Amman or Cairo, would be the most logical ones. Most of the time they fly out of Amman. Here are Carmen's parents in 2004, Rudolph and Angel Saada, with their granddaughter Madonna. In 1948, during the War of Independence, they lost their fine home. They had a very nice home in West Jerusalem. It's now occupied by a Jewish family without compensation from the people who owned the home. They were among 30,000 Palestinians, roughly, expelled. Rudolph was an artist in mother-of-pearl carving. Much of his work was stolen by Israeli soldiers in 1967. That's when Israel got into the East Jerusalem, into the old city. He had a shop just inside the New Gate. This is not necessarily his own carving, but it's the kind of carving that he did. Now there are one of Rudolph's masterpieces was found in a museum in Sydney, Australia. One of the members of the family went there and they checked to see if there was a signature, and there was, and it was Rudolph's. Members of the Zugby family, that would be a different family, not, these are Carmen's parents. Rudolph is Carmen's father. The Zugbys were also famous mother-of-pearl artists. They created pieces for the King of Egypt, King George I of Greece, the Vatican, King Hussein of Jordan, the Shah of Iran, the Sheikh of Kuwait, the Emperor of Ethiopia, the Tsar of Russia, and others. The family claims roots as Christians going back to the 3rd century in Yemen, where they were probably converts from Judaism, because there was a Jewish kingdom, at least one Jewish kingdom, if there may have been more, in Yemen during that time. Various calamities forced their tribe, the Ghassanids, to move north, first to Najran in the 5th century, then to Wadi Musa in 640, and finally to Bethlehem in the early 17th century. Part of Bethlehem is named after Farah, the ancestor who, one of the brothers, there were 3 brothers, one of the brothers went to Bethlehem, and that was Farah. And there's a quarter in pretty much the center of Bethlehem called Farahia. And that's named after one of the Zugbi ancestors. This is Michael's father, Elias. He emigrated to Mexico in the early 1900s and served in the Mexican army before returning to Palestine. 2 of his brothers who had joined him remained in Mexico. Actually, he had a wife and children in Mexico, and when he left his family. I don't know the circumstances. Latin America is home to the largest number of Palestinians outside of the Arab world, especially Honduras and Chile. A Palestinian, Carlos Roberto Flores, was president of Honduras for some years. Much of this Latin Palestinian diaspora left in the late 19th century. These are not refugees from 1948, 1967. These are people who left primarily a long time ago, and there are far more people living in the diaspora from Bethlehem than there are people living in Bethlehem. Michael's mother is Afifa. They had 7 sons, one of whom died in infancy, and they had 2 daughters. Michael's brother Zugby has a master's degree in peace studies from Notre Dame in Indiana. He's the founding director of the WIAM Center for Nonviolent Conflict Resolution in Bethlehem, which deals primarily with domestic violence, families, living under the pressure of occupation. There's just as a lot of domestic violence and family squabbles and one thing and another. So that's what he deals with. Some other members of the family. Cotter is a brother of Michael's. He was a professor of English at Bethlehem University, which is a Catholic university in Bethlehem. He just dropped dead about 3 years ago. Nicholas, another brother, is retired, but he's the Mukhtar in Bethlehem. A Mukhtar is it's kind of a ceremonial job. So when there's some kind of award or something, he has to go and represent the family and the tribe at these kinds of events. It's primarily ceremonial, although a Mukhtar traditionally is also kind of one who irons out squabbles in families and so forth. Anton, another brother, is a philosophy instructor at San Francisco State College. He's also a Baptist pastor. I think he's kind of retired right now. Isa, another brother, is a Pentecostal pastor. And these people are just all over the map in terms of religion. Linda, I think she's a Roman Catholic, or maybe Greek Orthodox, I forget. Anyway, a sister, she owned a tourist shop in Bethlehem, had to sell it because not many tourists in Bethlehem anymore. Hannah, a sister of Michael's, is a women's rights advocate and associated with YWCA in Jerusalem. Fuad, a cousin, archaeological survey leader. There's a guy at Concordia who has been digging, Olin Storvik. Olin worked a lot in Caesarea Maritima on a dig there in Israel, and has fond memories of working with Fuad. He always said he was a great worker. Sammy, a brother-in-law, is a translator for various people, including Arafat, in the past. This is an ordinary family, Palestinian family. It's not upper class by any means. Carmen's brother Ibrahim and his wife Katie, Ibrahim and his brother Khalil. Khalil died just a couple of years ago. Are artists in metal casting. And here's an example of their work in their shop, which is west of Jerusalem. It's owned by a Jewish guy, but Ibrahim is the person who actually does the casting. And Khalil also, some of you have been to the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth. It's a huge, big church. And there are huge bronze doors there. Well, Khalil is the one who cast them. This would be one of Carmen's brothers, older brothers. They also did the bronze doors of the Church of St. Peter of Gallicanto in Jerusalem. Here is an ID, a Palestinian ID, which is green. The color is the key thing. And you see it's written in Arabic as well as Hebrew, and I've translated some of the terms. Michael El-Zugbi is his actual name, but they skipped the L, the article, over here. Bethlehem is where he's from, Bethlehem. And they identify the religion on the Palestinian IDs. They do not do that on the Israeli IDs. They do indicate what they call nationality, which in Israel means ethnicity. So Jew, Druze. I'm not sure what they're calling the Palestinians over there, because they were talking about calling them Arabians or something. I'm not sure where that's at right now. Anyway, the word that they use is Notzari, or Notzrim. And I don't really know exactly why Israel uses this term for Christians. Historically, it probably is rooted in the idea of Christians being from Nazareth, and so they were Jewish Christians. I don't think it's necessarily a derogatory term, but I'm not quite sure the history of that, of why Israel calls Christians Natsari. And here's this is Carmen's ID, Jerusalem ID. Has a blue cover. It means that she's allowed to reside. Essentially, she's a visitor. She's an immigrant. Even though she was born in Jerusalem, she's treated as an immigrant who has a right to live in Jerusalem, but she also pays taxes. Because of this Jerusalem ID, she can travel anywhere in Israel. She qualifies for the Israeli health insurance program. You have to pay for it, but it's a much better deal than what we have here. The Israeli health insurance program is compulsory, and it's a very good program. And so people want to have a Jerusalem ID. Also, the jobs are much better in Jerusalem. The pay is better. So rather than living in Bethlehem, people would prefer to live in Jerusalem for a lot of reasons. To retain, however, this ID, they have to prove that Jerusalem is the center of their life. That's the term that the Israelis use, the center of life. In other words, it means that their whole life revolves around Jerusalem. And so you have to prove that, one of them with water bills or gas bills, electric bills. And Israeli agents come and like every 2 weeks and knock on the door to make sure that they're there. Sometimes they will call, but oftentimes they will come any time of day or night just to make sure that you're there all the time. Because Israel would really like them to leave. And if they could find a good reason for doing that, they would like that. Palestinians, of course, are people without a country, no nationality. There is no such thing as an Israeli nationality, by the way. An Israeli nationality would be a secular nationality. It's a very interesting situation, very fraught, and you might think that Judaism is the state religion in Israel. It's not. They don't have a state religion. Officially, Israel is a secular state. But Judaism is very strongly favored and supported by money, and you know, many of the national holidays are actually Jewish holidays. So it looks like it's kind of the state religion, but isn't really. But they don't want to, they want to be careful. They don't want a secular identity that could apply to everybody. This is a visa issued by the State of Israel to a resident of Jerusalem named Carmen. You might wonder, why would a resident of Jerusalem need a visa to go to Israel? That's because she's not a citizen of Israel, though she has a Jerusalem ID. When she goes abroad, she was there, she and her husband were here the latter part of last year, along with Madonna, the daughter. She needs a visa, she needs a visa, this is a visa, to get back in to her home. It's very, just bizarre, I think. And there's a roller coaster, I'm going to skip over most of this. They've had great struggles, huge struggles. Yeah, question.
What kind of passport does she travel on?
She has an Israeli passport. Yep.
Not a citizen.
Yep.
What about Michael?
Michael has two passports. He has a Palestinian passport and a Jordanian passport. Because Jordan had control over the West Bank, and you can still get, as a matter of fact, the law situation in the Palestinian in the West Bank is very strange because they use British law, they use Jordanian law, they use Israeli military law, they use tribal law. It's very, very complicated. That's one thing, one of the reasons why Palestinians need to have a state is so that they have a coherent legal system. They don't have one. More of the roller coaster. I think you got the idea. This is Abuna Yusuf. Abuna is an Arabic word for father. Father Yusuf is a priest of the Melkite or Greek Catholic Church in Nablus. This is his registration card as a refugee. And for 3 of his children, Melkite Catholics, I think I said before, they are the second largest communion in Palestine, Christian communion. Their priests are in communion with Rome. In fact, the church is in communion with Rome. But they may be married. And he is. His family, he told me, his family moved from Kerak on the west side of the Dead Sea, the east side of the Dead Sea. It's a huge Crusader castle, ruined castle, but it's an amazing place. There were a lot of people living in that area, but that was 400 years ago that he came. So he's not a newcomer exactly in Nablus. Well, this is in Bethlehem. I won't, stars and books, a little bit of fun. Jad Ivan, the young man I told you about who's in Seattle and is a counselor for Arabic-speaking immigrants, when I was there in 2010 and 11, he was working with a German or Austrian organization that provides care for children with disabilities. And while he was there, he created the first wheelchair basketball team in Palestine. And, there aren't many, who else are you going to play? You have to play somebody. He hooked up with a Israeli Jewish team in Tel Aviv. So this team, wheelchair basketball team in Tel Aviv and the wheelchair basketball team in Bethlehem got together from time to time to play a game. And this is just some scenes from those kids who were part of that program. This is, in fact, Jad Ivan. Not a very good picture in my view, I don't know. I also don't like He has such a nice black head of hair. I wish he'd grow his hair. But this is Madonna. She was here with her parents, and they were the two of them had not seen each other for 5 years, so they really enjoyed getting together. And they were here. They were here for Christmas, and she's now back in Bethlehem. I was Jan Yvonne asked me to be Santa Claus for the kids, these kids with disabilities of various kinds. In the past, the Santa Claus always wore a mask, and the kids were afraid of Santa. Can you imagine? I mean, he was kind of scary. Well, so they would actually come up and associate with me because I was actually a real person. The big thing in Christmas for Bethlehem, the biggest public event is a huge parade with many, especially Boy Scout and Girl Scout troops, many of which play, by the way, bagpipes. British, I don't know, British mandate maybe? I don't know what the deal is. So these are some young girls but the reason for the parade is that it comes just before Christmas, like on a Saturday. And the reason for the parade is to honor the Latin patriarch who comes to a monastery just on the north side of Bethlehem, and the media are all there, and we were there too. And here he is, Fouad Toual. He's now retired, but he was at that time the Latin patriarch. He was a member of a Christian Bedouin tribe in Jordan. His family came from that family. And a friend of mine who teaches who used to teach at Ecole Biblique in Jerusalem told me that the tribe had survived for 1,000 years without priests, sacraments, or church. As Christians, yes. Now the Bedouin, are the people who live in these tents out in the desert. So this is not a difficult place to have a parish. These are the boys. I love this expression on this young kid here. A few boys at a Lutheran school in Beit Jala, which is to the west of Bethlehem, village over there. The DR women's soccer team in Bethlehem. DR is a consortium of institutions that grew out of the Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, including a university, a K-12 school. The students in that K-12 school, 60% of them are Muslim. Medical clinics, a dance troupe, music conservatory, a tourism school, and much more. The team has been very successful. I don't know if it was exactly that team or not. Oh, there are Samaritans still, maybe 600 Samaritans still living. Here's a Samaritan priest, visited him. This guy, Wadshi Naseba, is in charge of opening and closing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the big, most important church for Christians. It's where both Calvary and the tomb from which Christ rose, they're both in that church. His Muslim family and one other Muslim family have held the key for the church for about 850 years. Why do Muslims have the key to the church? Because the Christians couldn't get together. They were constantly fighting one another, and they're still doing that. It's a scandal. We were in the village of Azun. A friend of Michael's was there. He and his wife entertained us royally, I would say, with a feast. Arab hospitality is very much alive and well, and you will be welcomed if you go over and visit. And some of you probably have. How many of you have been over there? So, several. Here's making pita breads, also in Bethlehem. This guy is Atala Mansour. He was the first Palestinian Arab reporter for the prestigious Israeli newspaper Haaretz. And he wrote in Hebrew. He's also the first Arab to publish a novel in Hebrew. He lives in Nazareth. Just recently, Yaqub Shaheen won the Arab Idol title in a show that is hugely popular. It's like the shows that we have here about, what are they called? I forget. American Idol, yeah. And so the final night when they were down to 3 finalists. 2 of them were Palestinians. This is very unusual. And Manger Square in Bethlehem, which is a large plaza, filled with thousands of people watching a big screen to see this. And the guy from Bethlehem won. So that was a big deal. Palestinians are an agrarian people. They are historically farmers. Vast amounts of their land were lost in 1948 and again in 1967, and it continues to this day. They are now severely restricted in the use of water for farming, difficult access to the field, partly because of the wall, but also because of the settlements. And the settlements are controlling much of the area around the settlement and even doing their farming themselves, even though the land is not theirs. And they're wreaking havoc with the farms, their orchards, denying access to the land. The settlers have destroyed nearly 1 million olive trees, Palestinian olive trees, since 1967. Agriculture here near the village of Batir. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's also the site of the final battle of the Romans during the Second Jewish Revolt in 132 to 135. And this village is where Bar Kokhba, who was the leader of that revolt, he was killed in this village. And here's the modern, of course the Romans destroyed the village. So this is the contemporary village of Bethlehem, or of Batir. The terraces are said to be 4,000 years old, but it's very hard to know, very hard to date terraces. Here are some terraces with olive trees. Here are some olives ready for pressing. Fig trees, figs ready. Nadim Khoury and his brother David built the first brewery in the Middle East in the West Bank village of Taiba. Very good beer, I would say. Taiba beer. It's a German style beer. Nadim's son now, they just started a winery several years ago, 2013, and his son is running that winery. He had training in the United States. This guy here is a Dutch guy. I don't remember what he was doing.
Who's their market, if I may ask?
Palestinians. They're trying to sell it to the United States, to export it, but it's very difficult because they want to be known as from Palestine. They don't want to be known as, but you know, the United States postal regulations are difficult because Palestine doesn't exist as a country. And the Israelis are doing the same thing. So I don't know if they succeeded in breaking into the market here or not. A little note about why it's important to tell personal stories, as I've been doing. Dr. Brian Barber was an author of a 20-year longitudinal study of Palestinian youth, primarily in Gaza. And he says, one of the biggest injustices, in my opinion, is the lack of attention to individuals' day-to-day lived experience. I think that's quite a critical information. That's what I was trying to convey to you, the sense that this is what life is like. It's a constant struggle, never knowing what you could do next week or how things are going to turn out. You can't live together. It's really a struggle. And especially humiliation robs people of their dignity, grace, and their ability to have self-respect. That is very destructive. Our study also suggests that people are able to deal with more physically violent things much better than the deprivation of dignity. And here's a comment by Ali Kalaibo, who is an ethnologist, a Palestinian ethnologist in Jerusalem. These comments arise out of a particular context, namely the Second Intifada. He says, I cannot hate, for hate diminishes my sense of inner happiness. How can I live with myself if I were to allow these ugly feelings to find their way to me? But then he says, I cannot live with hate, but I remain a human being susceptible to suffering and vulnerable to outrage. Given the context of the Israeli occupation, it's very difficult not to hate. For in Jerusalem, I'm not treated as a regular human being. I, as a Palestinian, lose my sense of individuality to become a generic Muslim Arab, a suspect persona. This is from a demonstration at Harvard. The woman on the left says, I'm a Palestinian Arab. I was born in Jerusalem. Palestine is my homeland, but I cannot return there. And the Jewish woman to the right, I'm an American Jew. I was born in USA. Israel is not my homeland, but I can return there. One of the strange things, when you have a state that is oriented to one class of people. Ariel Sharon, by the way, is a settler too. Some of you may remember him. This is in the Muslim quarter. And he's been pretty brazen about his assertion of control over a building where he shouldn't be at all. This is settler only 60 road number 60, connecting South Jerusalem colonies to colonies farther south. Most of it was built on land seized from Palestinians. The olive trees in the area are now owned by Palestinians, or they've always been, but they're largely inaccessible now. And according to a military order, it forbids Palestinians, even if they have permits to enter Jerusalem, they cannot do so on this road. Deputy Defense Minister, this was just very recent, Eli, I think, Ben-Dahan, points to the route of a new settler-only road that will go straight up the middle of the West Bank, announced in December of last year. that will connect colonies and other roads designed to ease traffic, increase colony population, and prepare for the annexation of the West Bank. Ben Dahad said, "It is a big opportunity for us to annex Judea and Samaria." And that's from a conservative paper, the Jerusalem Post. I want to focus your attention the water issue. The Oslo Agreement in 1995, an interim agreement, gave Israelis 71% of the water from the mountain aquifer. Palestinians have no access whatever to Jordan River water, even though it runs much of the Jordan River is right by the West Bank. 17% for Palestinians, but today, now it's 87% of this water aquifer, which is the main aquifer in all of Israel-Palestine. 13%. So farmers, it's very difficult to farm in dry land when you don't have access to water. As a matter of fact, you don't have access to a lot of chemicals that you would like to have for herbicides and fungicides and whatever, because they're not allowed by the Israelis. How about the kill ratio? From September 29th to 2000, that's the beginning of the second Intifada, 134 Israeli children have been killed by Palestinians, 2,149 Palestinian children killed by Israelis from the same date. And in terms of totals, 1,200 Israelis and at least almost 9,500 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of the second Intifada. The Gaza invasion in summer of 2014 was a 7-week war on Gaza. 2,251 Palestinians were killed, including 551 children. 73 Israelis were killed, including 6 civilians. 11,231 Palestinians were injured, including 3,400 children. More than 1,500 children were orphaned. 18,000 homes were destroyed or seriously damaged. 73 hospitals or healthcare centers were destroyed or seriously damaged. Gaza was turned into a wreck. This is a house that I saw in 2004, demolished by Israelis as collective punishment for a family because of their suicide bomber son. This is, suicide bombers don't happen anymore. That's a thing of the past. But this son was killed, or killed himself, I should say. He didn't kill anybody else, actually. He killed only himself. I visited with the family. They were living in a tent nearby. Israel has demolished about 50,000 homes, and not counting the 18,000 destroyed in Gaza, 50,000 homes. It's a different program, so to speak. 50,000 homes since 1967, because they don't have housing permits, and Israelis won't give them housing permits. Carla? Time? Okay. We're going to have to really run through. Israel has no Bill of Rights or Constitution. It does have basic laws that are intended to form a constitution. In February, 4 new justices were added, and one just this month also resigned, has not been replaced yet. But what's happening is that Israeli human rights are now in question because the Supreme Court had been the one that provided some assurance of rights. But international law does apply. Now, we're going to go through this very, very quickly. I do want to mention that according to international law, Palestinians do have the right to resist and to struggle for liberation from colonial and foreign domination and alien subjugation by all available means, including armed struggle, according to international law. And the Palestinians have a right to resist, but Israel continues to call them terrorists. Now, I have a sheet out there with information about how you can get access to the relevant law. There is an international law of occupation. It was created because of what happened in Europe during the Second World War, when Germany occupied a number of countries. And that occupation was not a very kind thing. So the international community wanted to protect civilians, and so they added a fourth convention to the Geneva Conventions, and that one deals with civilians. So I'm just going to, I think, just mention this fact. And there are, I didn't list this, but there are, by the way, you can see all the occupations here. One of the odd things is, in Iraq, the George Bush administration actually declared an occupation with the United Nations. So they said the laws of occupation apply to us. Now, there were some advantage in doing that, but there were also, well, there's a question too whether they actually followed the laws. But the United States did recognize its occupation, along with Great Britain. So there are a whole bunch of articles that are violated, but I wanted to call your attention particularly to number 49. The occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its civilian population into the territory it occupies. In other words, all the Israeli colonies are illegal. What it is not, the conflict is not an instance of some long, deep-seated hatred between Arabs and Jews. It's a conflict that Israel has helped to create, essentially. I was going to go through here slowly, but I've talked about that a little bit before, so I think we'll skip through that so that we'll have time for a question or two. Here's my assessment. Israel began as a secular socialist state. They've been moving away, especially from the time of Menachem Begin in 1977. They've been moving away from secularism, socialism and secularism, and they've been inching, not just inching, they've been leaping in the direction of religious nationalism. So that's what we have now. One person has called it an ethnocracy, and he's spoken of creeping apartheid. The reference, the title of that book, and a brief summary of some of its contents is on that paper that you can pick up as you leave. I see no hope for a two-state solution. I think you saw some reasons why. Well, let's just leave it at that, and then ask if you have a question or comment.
I'll just interject here. For those of you who need to keep moving on for a day, why don't we'll let those people leave, and then if there's people who are interested in staying for a few minutes and hearing a little bit of conversation and a question or two, then we'll do that. So if you need to leave, please go ahead. Thank you for coming. Deb's handing out papers and the works.
And then for those of you who can stay a few extra minutes, please post your question or your comments.
Yes.
Graffiti on the wall. I visited the border in Mexico. And an American guy that's rusted and whatever. On the Mexican side, they painted works of art along the wall.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that it's happened on the Palestinian
Yeah.
side of this wall.
And it's not just
You see there's
Palestinians.
mocking of it, but it's all, any thoughts on that?
Well, it's not just Palestinians, it's also a lot of people going over there. Groups from Europe and the United States and so forth, and other countries. I don't know, it's really interesting stuff. A lot of it is not, a lot of it is quite satirical and humorous. It's not tough, some of it is, you know, but
Others
other,
on the Mexican side here, it's not a commentary, it's all real.
yeah.
Just to make
Yeah.
something ugly.
There's actually an icon of Mary on the wall.
If the two-party state is not an option or solution, do you have any idea of what you see is possible? What kind of situation that can satisfy in the future voters?
I think there would have to be, I don't see any option but a one-state solution where everybody is a citizen and everybody is equal. So it's no longer one ethnos who has control, but you would have to have all kinds of provisions to make sure that it actually does work to be equal, because the history speaks against it. And there would have to be really, and I just don't see that happening. I wish it would.
Wasn't it Secretary Kerry that said Israel will either become a Jewish state or a democracy, but it can't be both?
Yeah, yeah.
You show the population statistics. Is that a new situation or has it always been pretty close between Israelis and Palestinians?
For quite a while.
Okay.
It's
So
been
that's not
close.
new.
Yeah.
Permits, are those based on birth, the place of birth?
Yeah.
You know, Michael and Carmen, they have different permits. So are those based on where they were born?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no other categories to change their status?
No. Well, if you have a Jerusalem ID, let's say you decide for some reason you get married and you want to become Palestinian, move to the West Bank, you could do that and then you'd get a Palestinian ID. If you get a Palestinian ID, you'll never get a Jerusalem ID. That would be excluded. So that's about the only way you can go. Larry?
Would you exegete Chairman Arafat's assertion that the best Palestinian weapon was the Arab womb?
You mean, so victimization as a weapon?
No,
Womb. Oh, womb. I thought you said womb.
Making,
My hearing is not very good, so.
neither is mine. Making babies.
Yeah,
Making
okay.
babies to make war. Making war to make babies.
No, I don't think so. The best weapon is what they call samud, which means just staying put, steadfastness, remaining. You know, the metaphor for them, for Palestinians, is the olive tree, which has deep roots in tough soil and just stays there. And you can knock it, you can cut down most of the branches and it'll grow back. It's a very hardy tree. I think that's their best weapon.
But that's agrarian.
which, as you pointed out, has come to an end. The womb is social, biological. It's of the people. And couldn't our thought be right in saying that demographics will change the situation between Jews and Palestinians?
I think that's possible, yes. I mean, Israel is willing to think about, or used to be willing to think about, addressing that issue, but right now I don't see any sign that they're doing that. They're not willing to.
But if the settlements grow faster than the population of Palestinians, then it makes no difference if there's more Palestinians, there will be more settlements.
Yeah, the settlements, I should maybe make a couple comments about the settlements because they can be divided into two broad categories. One would be kind of radical fanatics, and there are a bunch of those, especially in the hinterland, in the kind of deep inside the West Bank. Most of the settlers are not there for some kind of radical reason. Most of them are there because it's cheaper. Housing is extremely expensive in Israel. It's half as expensive because of all the subsidies that Israel provides to the settlements. So people are moving to these settlements primarily, and the settlements, by the way, are not agricultural. I mean, you look at them, and there's no agriculture there. The houses are very close to one another. So they are bedroom communities. And young couples getting married, that's what they do, is they go to a settlement. But they've overbuilt the settlement. Not all the settlements are full of people, but they want to keep building them because it's more land that they...
Can we take this one last question?
What is the difference between an Israeli Arab and a Palestinian? Can you be both?
You can only if you identify yourself. If, let's say you're an Israeli Arab. You are a citizen of Israel, but you may identify yourself with Palestinians. And you may identify for historic reasons, for genealogical reasons or whatever else, or just identify with the struggle. And more Israeli Arabs are calling themselves Palestinians because they see themselves as in Israel, they are second-class citizens. You go to an Israeli Arab village and it's, they don't have lawns, because Israel's budget provides only a very small amount for Arab places. Israel has created, I think, about 1,000 new Israeli towns, not one Palestinian town for the Israeli Arabs. I mean, this is very, very much a second class.
So that might be an indication of what a one-state solution would look like.
Yes, and most Palestinians would welcome that. Michael would be happy to live in Israel. In fact, he might do that. I don't know how. He's talking about moving to Nazareth, which is in Israel. He likes the health system. He likes a lot of things about Israel.
Well, thank you so much for